Draco, soldier. She make it clap, clap, clap. She make it clap, clap.
Good day, CA 200 Institutional Correction students, teachers, and viewers of this video. I am Cadet Monopolio and I am here to talk about the lessons under Chapter 1, namely a global view on prison administration. So let us discuss what are the global view on prison administration from around the globe, especially in the Philippines. Second is the prison from Antiquity to Modernity. So we are going to discuss how the prison system evolved from the ancient times up today in the modern times. Third is the influence of Roman Catholic Church and how it affected the life of every inmates inside the prisoner or inside the prisons. Fourth is Pope John Paul II, the pro-life Pope. Let us discuss how Pope John Paul influenced the lives of every people around the globe or every country he visited, and how Pope John Paul influenced the correctional system. Next is the Walnut Street Jail, or what is the relation of Walnut Street Jail in correction system. And sixth is King Henry VIII and how King Henry influenced the life of every person in Poland and to the country that he manages. And lastly is King Edward VI, a jewel of King Henry, or the son of King Edward. King Edward is the son of King Henry, in which we are going to discuss how they influence and how they are related to correction. So first, let us talk about a prison administration. So let us first talk about what is prison. So a prison is a house legally held punishment for crime for those people who committed or who violated the law. So prison system is not just a house, a simple house just like what we are living, or just like a simple house that we supposed to live, but it is a place where individuals who violated the law are isolated socially, so they are put in a place where away from the society as a punishment and as a payment or their debt for violating the law. So prison system has evolved today from before until today, and then people before had already their prison systems in which they use as punishment for different crimes that happened before. So in part of that, prison also have this what we call prison administration. So according to Carlson and Garrett of 1999, that prison administration are fundamentally involves the application of both leadership and management techniques to correctional institution. So which means that prison administration is administered or managed by different law enforcers. They are legally held or they are given the power to manage whatever the crime an individual has done. So the extent of imprisonment worldwide cannot be determined because obviously we have a lot of countries that deal with different crimes, and yet this cannot be determined precisely, but of course a broad estimate can be achieved. So the opportunity to compare the figures for individual countries provide the basis for assessing need for policy changes. So which means that every institution or every prison administrations, they need to be changed technically, the policy changes or their rules and regulations inside the prisons from time to time. So which means that it it should be changed accordingly depending on how the prison administration manages the prison system or the correctional system. So in 2018, the Philippines has held the sixth highest prison population in over the 21 Asian countries. So as 2019, the Philippines population rested at 108.31 million people, and 2015 of those were incarcerated. So which means that we have a lot of people, and um, few of it, or almost half of it, is being incarcerated. So therefore, the Philippines has an incarceration rate of 200 per 1,000 citizens. So there are 933 running prison systems in the Philippines, which means that would be so big, a big population which covers almost half of the citizens in the Philippines who live there. Unfortunately, they are mismanaged and overcrowded. So later on in my video, let's talk why, or let us discuss why they are being, or why the prisons is now overcrowded. So for some reason, we have a lot of reasons why prisons in the Philippines are being overcrowded. So let's maybe let's talk about it later, or let's first discuss about the 933 prisons here in the Philippines. So according to the brief, as of 2018, the Philippines is a home to 933 prisons. So imagine having 933 prisons here in the Philippines, and we cannot tell that those, which means that the number of prison system in the Philippines would also relate to the criminal rate of such country. So with a total prison population of 188,278 inmates, which means that would be almost half or three-fourths of the population in the Philippines. That would be equivalent to 75.1%, and that includes the pre-trial detainees, which means that it includes the numbers of those who are still pre-trial or waiting for the trial of the court. So that would also add to the number of prisoners in the Philippines. So this phenomenon in turn is possibly what gave rise to Duterte's strong support when he announced his war on drugs. So which means that the number of prison system, or the number of incarcerated person, are getting higher and higher as what our president um, imposed the war on drugs. So it means that the war on drugs is a proof that Philippines has a lot of criminals that are not yet incarcerated, or who are roaming around, and they are still under the investigation of the police officers. So the prison administration covers the following thematic areas, which means that prison administration is under these four thematic areas, namely the pre-trial detention, the prison management, and alternative measures and sanctions, social reintegration. So this, for prison administration, is about how they are divided, or how prison administration is functions as an administration. Okay, so let's talk about the pre-detention under prison administration. So there are three main issues that need to be taken into consideration when we talk about pre-trial detention. So first is the pre-trial detention is overused in some countries, which means that pre-trial detainees are more overpopulated or overcrowded more than those who are on the prisoners population. So which means that the pre-detainees population is much larger than the prisoners population. Second was to recognize the vulnerability of pretrial detainees, and to make sure that their rights are being catered, or was not being abused and not ill-treated. So this doesn't mean that pretrial detainees are treated very bad, because as what we will base on its definition, pre-trial detainees are those persons who still wait for their trial, or who are waiting for their cases to be solved, or under the process, or under what do you call this, under the court, and still on the process of investigation. And lastly, the pretrial detainees should be assumed innocent until proven by the court of law. So which means that pretrial detainees should be um, considered innocent, and they are not considered as criminals or suspect for some issues they are involved, because they are still under um, investigations. So those are the three important things to consider under prison administration. Next is the prison management. So, prison authorities have a responsibility to ensure the supervision and treatment of prisoners, which is in line with the rule of law. So, of course, prison management should be managed by those who are not abused by their power, or those who are not abusive of their power, because human as we are, we should also be treated right, regardless of how or why we violated the law. So, of course, with the respect of the individual's human rights, we should also consider that um, our prisoners also have their human rights inside the prison. So that doesn't just mean that just because they are prisoners, they doesn't have the right anymore. So of course, they are also given the right, and they should be treated right inside the prison, in regardless of what issues they may be. So, and the period of imprisonment should be used to prepare individuals' life outside the prison from the following release. So, of course, talking to this, preparing those persons for their afterlife, or their after the imprisonment, is very difficult, because those, let's say for example, those who have issues of killing, for example, if they are released on prison, the community will find hard, or the society will find hard to accept them, just because of what they have done in the past. So their past issues would also affect their lives in starting a new one, instead of helping them to be a better version of themselves, and to, of course, change them and encourage them to continue, even if there are past issues that we know it's hard to forget and cannot be forgotten. So the prisoners, or the old prisoners, will also find difficult or find hard in looking for a job, especially if they have cases that are long-term cases, or they are spending the rest of their lives almost in the prison system. So they will also find hard to look for a job. And of course, speaking of family, some of the prison members, or the detainees from prisoners, find hard to go back to their families, because some cases, families doesn't accept them anymore, just because of the past issues they are into. So that would also be hard for those prisoners who are being released. So that should also be considered as one of the rights of the prisoners, because of course they are humans too. And next is, let's talk about alternative measures and sanctions. So, numerous international instruments recommend a rationalization in sentencing policy, including the wider use of alternatives to prison, aiming to reduce the power of being isolated from the society for long periods of time. So, there should also be alternative measures and sanctions used, or should be given to those who are in prison, because this is to reduce the population, or the population overpopulation in detainees. Of course, for those who are under pretrial detention, they should be given alternative sanctions and different measures too. Next is the social reintegration. So one of the principal objectives of um, prison administration was the prison reform, which is to contribute the successful reintegration of prisoners into society following their release. So some interventions is used to prepare the prisoners for entry to the society. So this is what I have told you a while ago, that Prisoners detainees from different prisons will also find hard to re-enter the society just because they have past issues. So that would be so hard for them, especially society is naturally judgmental in nature. So that would be so hard for them, especially in finding a job and of course re-entering the society in mingling again with the person around them. So next is the healthcare. So of course, in a prison system, there should be also healthcare given to those who are in prisons because we cannot avoid contamination from different illnesses such as fever, tuberculosis, and some other issues or some other illnesses that would contaminate from one person to another. So the evaluance of the healthcare and the right to health is principle that applies to all prisoners who are entitled to receive the same quality of medical care that is available in the community, which means prisoners should also be given the right to be cured um, for whatever sickness or whatever bad feelings they may feel inside the prison system. They should also be given um, the same treatment as what they have given the treatment in the community. Say for example, they should be given also free medicines, just what the government has given in the community, and free checkups, just like that. They should also be given like services like that because that is also part of their right as a prisoner and as a person. So for my conclusion, there are several social, political, economic, and cultural factors that has been used to account for high levels of incarceration, which means that there are more and more, aside from what I have discussed, there are still a lot of factors that should be considered as account for incarceration. So crime rates are the factor for most commonly thought to be related levels of incarceration. So basically, crime was the main reason why incarceration has been evolved or has been introduced in the community. Next, that would be the last for my presentation in global view on prison administration. Let's talk about the prisons from antiquity to modernity, and let us discuss how prisons evolved from antiquity to the modern times. So let's first talk about the history of prisons. So from the birth of modern civilizations in 3rd BC millennia, almost every major ancient civilizations use the concept of prison is as a mean of as a mean to detain and remove personal freedoms from those individuals who violated the law. So which means that prison systems are used to isolate those who violated the law and as a serve for them as a punishment to remove their personal freedoms, which means that they will be incarcerated inside the prison system and be away from their families. Just what how or just like how our prison system adopted in the more modern times. So in those early periods of history, prisons were often used as a temporary stopgap from sentencing to death, either from sentencing to death or from the slavery. So people before experienced slavery as a payment or as a punishment for them for violating the law. So prison systems are used as a stopgap, or um, prison system will stop them instead of directing them being sentenced to death or either being a slave of work. So but as time went on and our civilization developed, prisons started morphing into correctional facilities that started implementing the concept of rehabilitation and reform of prisoners. So, which means that ever since before, they started from prison systems that would stop or a stopgap from sentencing to death, and until now they adopted and move or make prison system as a correctional facilities and a house for rehabilitation. In addition of holding convicted or suspected criminals, prisons were often used for holding political prisoners. Of course, we also have political prisoners or those who are in politics who abuse their power, so they will also be brought to prisons, not just those who are ordinary individuals who violated the law, because political mistakes or political issues should also be addressed and should also be given justice for the sake of those who seek justice, especially from the community. So those individuals in the community deserve the transparency from the political, from our political holders or those who are in politics, or our governors or our respected officials, government officials. So they should also be brought to prison if they have violated the law. So prisons were often used for holding political prisoners, enemies of state, and prisoners of war. So enemies of state, which means that those who tries to question the state or how our government manages our state. For those who tries to question, for say for example, those new people's army in our term, not just to mention or not to offend them, but they are examples of those who let's say enemies of state, and the prisoners of war for those who are in, involved in different wars, so they will also be incarcerated or being brought to prisons. So the earliest records of prisons comes from the first millennia BC, located in the areas of mighty ancient civilizations. So the first recorded prisons was on the mighty ancient civilizations. So the ancient Roman Empire, however, used harsher methods in their prison system. So their prisons were built almost exclusively underground with tight claustrophobic passageways and cells. So which means that this way of having a prison system is more harsher than those of the Mesopotamian and the Egyptian um, kind of prison system. So let us now proceed to the development of prison system and how it evolved from antiquity to modernity and what are the differences between them. So the difference or the development of prison system started, or the houses of correction started in are established in Europe for the rehabilitation of minor offenders and migrants. So which means that in our modern times, London was or Europe was the first to adopt the prison system, which is used for those who are minor offenders and vagrants. They emphasize strict discipline and hard labor. So for them, they are not put under dungeons or whatever, but instead they are um, given a hard labor and strict disciplines in order to correct them, especially they are still minors. They are under the supervision of adults in different law enforcement, and of course for those who organizations who cater the rights of every young offenders. So over time, imprisonment came to be accepted as an appropriate method of punishing convicted criminals. So this is how it evolved, and this is how or what we adopt today. Prisoners or prisons was used to legally adopted as a punishment for those who offended the law or for those who violated the law. So the theory of modern prison began in London, influenced by Jeremy Bentham. So the first who introduced this prison system here in our modern days was in London, introduced by Jeremy Bentham, a great philosopher. He introduced the principle of observation and control as seen in today's modern prison system. So, prison system was used to correct those who are or those who violated the law, and um, it means that individuals are under control of those enforcers, and they are while under observation and while being corrected. He also started the idea of incarceration as punishment until trial or hanging. So which means that he also introduced the idea of incarceration, or for those this is how pre-detainees or pre-detainee has evolved or has been introduced. All of his views and ideas have greatly influenced the first prisons used for criminals. So Jeremy Bentham's um, introduction of prison system was very helpful in addressing or in correcting those individuals who violated the law and those who have depth in the society. So corrections in the Philippines started during the pre-colonial time. So before the Philippines has been colonized by different um, groups, we already had our correction system. It was, however, organized on individual community basis. So those are our correction systems was developed or organized by different community leaders. So it was only during the Spanish regime where an organized corrective service was made operational. So that after the Spanish regime, that was um, the correctional system was used or made operational. So when the Americans took over, so after the Spanish, we have Americans. In the 19th, the Bureau of Prison was created under the Reorganization Act of 1905 or the number with the number 1407 dated November 1, 1905. So that is how the modern system evolved from antiquity to modernity.